This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 29th of November 2022 at home in Wicklow. And it is what I call a free roamer. I roam all over the place in this one and set out with no clear end point, just knowing I had a couple of things I wanted to talk about. So it is a bit of a mishmash, and there is a tonal shift about midway through, which is it's a hard left from where I was. But as ever, I try to keep things reasonably palatable. But amongst other things, I talk about a new arrival here at #Blessed. It's kind of fun. That's a lovely surprise for my wife and daughter. So I talk about that. I talk about chemicals and hormones that keep us happy and well. You'll know them by their names: dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, oxytocin, and there's a relevance to those and the aforementioned surprise. I then move in a very different direction and talk about Wilfred Owen, the English war poet. That this is on the back of listening to a podcast about him, another podcast about him, and I do credit that appropriately. But I did want to focus on one or two things that were raised in that podcast, and think a little bit about conflicts that are happening elsewhere in the world at the moment, and the attitudes around war and conflict. I talk a little bit about Christmas in this episode and the kind of contradictory pulls that happen, for me anyway, around this time of year. I also talk about Captain Kirk, James T. Kirk, and another officer who's also a James Kirk. And I talk about Captain James Cook. So, yes indeed, Kirks and Cooks and Owens, poets, all kinds of things. It's a mixed bag. It's a miscellany, but I try to keep it together. Some unexpected things. Anyway, that's it. That's what's coming up. I don't know if that sounds appealing at all, but as ever, it's my attempt to flow, to riff, to go with it, and to reflect something real, something that's going on at the moment, and maybe I achieve that. You be the judge. Okay, see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind, keep my moji.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. How are you? How are you moving? That's a pretty strong indication of many things, how you're moving. An indication of mood, an indication of health, of age, perhaps, an indication of intention. So how are you moving? It's funny, I was looking at Terms of Endearment. Terms of Endearment, the 1983 movie starring Shirley MacLaine and Deborah Winger as a mother and daughter. And the movie sort of charts their relationship and their romances, and it was a very successful comedy drama, dramedy. I believe I used that word last week as well. But it was interesting to watch it. James Brooks James L. Brooks was the director, who subsequently gave us the brilliant Broadcast News in 1986, a few years later. A much more successful film, in my opinion. But in terms of endearment, Jack Nicholson and Shirley MacLaine, who I think were respectively 46 and 48 maybe at the time, or 49. It's fascinating to watch them in that movie. Now, they're both very entertaining. Jack Nicholson particularly. It might be the sort of definitive Jack Nicholson being a caricature of himself. The rogue, the rapscallion, the unflappable charmer, the romancer, the lover of women. A very a great kind of comic turn by Jack Nicholson as a retired astronaut who is a unabashed Lothario and lover of young women, and he lives next door to the Shirley MacLaine character, who during the course of the film turns 50 and is quite vain and does not want to get old and doesn't wish anybody to know that she's a grandmother. And what was interesting, and this comes back to the how are you moving question, what was interesting was watching how they moved. And I was looking at them going, Jack Nicholson then in that movie was younger than I am now. Shirley MacLaine was younger. Shirley MacLaine was, close to my age now, but her sort of style and her makeup and her hair, it was like 50 was 70. And Jack Nicholson was also moving like someone who was about to be given a gold watch. And if you think of the Jack Nicholson performance in About Schmidt, when he is playing someone who is retired and grieving his deceased wife, and it was a hailed Jack Nicholson performance because it was because of the lack of vanity. But there's a lot of evidence there through Jack Nicholson's career. Like he was always a guy who wasn't afraid to play clowns. Now they might have been slightly demonic, hell-raising, anarchic clowns, but an actor who was very adept at playing a sort of buffoon, almost Bottom-like, from A Midsummer Night's Dream. But yeah, to watch him and Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment was to go, oh wow, we're meant to believe that these are old people, like old aging people, and it's quite bizarre. It's quite bizarre. I mean, I'd recommend you go back and seek it out and just watch them. Watch how they move. Watch the type of bodies they're presenting us with, the energy that they're presenting us with. It just feels very odd, even though their performances are quite charming. Yeah, anyway. There you go. So to return to my query, how are you moving? How are you stepping out? I've got a bit of a sore back, and I'm recording this in not the usual room in #blessed, and it does force me into a slightly unnatural posture, but so be it. I'm willing to suffer for my art, and it's my last opportunity to really record here peacefully. My women. I'm using the possessive there. My women, my girls, my wife and my daughter are returning. They are returning tomorrow. At the time of recording, that is, they're returning tomorrow. In 12 hours' time, I will be on the road to the airport to go and collect them. So they've been away for about 35 days. Doesn't sound like much, or does it? When they left, I thought, wow, 5 weeks. I just saw this sort of utopian vision rolling out before me. 5 weeks of contemplation. 5 weeks of productivity. 5 weeks of writing and creating, and of really living the sort of ascetic, hermetic life to work on my art, my craft, to hone my creative blade. It didn't quite work out like that. It didn't quite work out like that. There are a couple of reasons for that. I was, I was busy. I was busy, busy working, and busy doing my usual bits and pieces, teaching more karate classes. I taught the holistic self-defense course over that time. I did five Tuesdays of that in the end at the Broca Centre in Lara, and had a great time with the participants. I've obviously been doing the podcast once a week as well, and teaching a bit of Tai Chi as well. My karate kids, my karate kids have been coming to me. And there've been a few dinners here at #blessed. A few dinners. I've had a few dinners. My nephew was over a couple of times. One of my brothers was over a few times. Had a friend down. Another friend came. Busy boy. Now, that's grand. No big deal, you say. And, surely you had plenty of time around all that to sit down and work on whatever the hell you work on. But the thing is, I had a plan. I had another plan that preceded the lots of writing plan, the creativity plan. I had decided a little while ago, before my wife and daughter went away, I decided I wanted to surprise them with a lovely surprise, a surprise gift. And as it happened, the timing of this surprise has coincided with them going away. So now it's a surprise that is waiting for them when they arrive home tomorrow. Can you hear that? Can you hear that sound in the background? I don't know how audible that is. Yeah, I can see that the mic is picking it up. That's 2 guinea pigs. The guinea pigs have been mentioned before on the podcast, but that's the sound they make when they're just doing their own thing, pretty happy. They're 2 brothers, and they do little perimeters of their cage, sort of face to butt, and they patrol their grounds, and they make that sound. Anyway, the surprise that I have now waiting for my the women in my life is a puppy. That's right. A 4-legged friend that's not a cat or a guinea pig, or a chicken. Chickens only have 2 legs, I know. But imagine if there was a chicken who thought it was a cat or a dog and walked with its wings kind of touching the ground and said to its friends, look, I'm a cat, meow, and tried to lick itself, and all the other chickens laughed and thought that chicken was hilarious. In that case, the chicken would be a four-legged friend as well. Unless it was a mutant chicken and actually had four legs, and that would be freaky. So anyway, I have a puppy, and it's a girl, and she's a border collie, and her name is Pepper. Pepper, as in the spice, the condiment. Pepper, excuse me, Pepper. So Pepper is sitting across the room from me at the moment, sound asleep, like a good dog. And Pepper, I'd hoped, would arrive around now. I'd hoped she would arrive sort of late November, so I'd have all that other time to do what I had to do. But no, that's not what fate had in store. So Pepper arrived at the start of the month, the 5th of November. So I've had the last 3.5 weeks to try and bed her in and get her accommodated and acclimated to the vibes and the tone of #blessed, and to try and assimilate her into this little menagerie with the older cat, who is extremely hostile, and the younger cat, who has, they herself and Pepper have become reasonably good friends. So, so like if you think of someone who wants to concentrate and have solitude and serenity and peacefulness and quiet moments to be creative and to invite the muse into the consciousness, one thing that's guaranteed to raise a leg to that is the introduction of a puppy. So that has really ended up being a substantial focus of the last, for most of this month. But it's funny, I was looking at something online yesterday or a couple of days ago, and it was a little infographic looking at the 4, what are they chemicals or hormones? Is a hormone a chemical? I find myself, when it comes to the language that is actually useful and correct, I find myself at a loss. But anyway, it was a little infographic describing the contributory factors to the production of these 4 chemicals or hormones. And I'm referring to oxytocin, serotonin, I know I'm going to forget one, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphin, and what was the other one? There's 4. Dopamine. That's it. Dopamine. So dopamine is the reward chemical. I'm just going to look it up because I'm just going to be frustrated trying to stumble my way through remembering what they are and what they kind of represent. But in any case, let me just check. Oh, here it is. Yeah, happiness chemicals. There you go. Happiness chemicals and how to hack them. This is what I saw. This was on Instagram. So dopamine is the reward chemical. Oxytocin is the love hormone. So there you go. I chemicals and hormones. I was right. Serotonin, the mood stabilizers, and endorphin is the painkiller. So this is interesting. So dopamine, the reward chemical. This is the I'm sure you've come across dopamine in the context of social media and our relationship to our phones. And when our phone pings, if you've put something up on social media and you're getting little notifications saying, good boy, good girl, well done, very good. That's our, our little tail starts wagging because, somebody is giving us a reward. So But as we know, that relationship with technology, our devices, our phones, it's not very organic, is it? Really, it's it ultimately, it's like a McDonald's meal. It leaves us wanting more and feeling kind of icky. So dopamine, if you want to go about getting that in other ways, according to my infographic, that's not mine, the infographic that I saw on Instagram and I'm stealing, eating food can give you a dopamine hit. Now, I presume that means eating food that's good for you, because eating a lot of junky food wouldn't make you feel good. Achieving a goal, so a sense of achievement, a sense of accomplishing or finishing something. I get that. Completing a task. Okay, so achieving a goal and completing a task, I suppose they can be different things. A goal could be a long-term goal. So that's, that's a whole other discussion, isn't it? Achieving a goal. What's your goal? To live till I'm 95. So when I get to 95, I'm just going to get this massive dopamine hit. Maybe. Completing a task. I want to wash the dishes and make sure the house is nice and clean for when my girls come home. Self-care activities. Well, I'm good at that one because probably a lot of my healthful body practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, karate, swimming, football, walking, they're all self-care activities as far as I'm concerned. In a way, doing the podcast ticks some of these boxes. So when I record the podcast once a week, that's completing a task and it's achieving a goal. So that's two things at once. And it's also a self-care activity because I find the podcast therapeutic in a way because I see it as a creative endeavor, and being creative and producing something of merit. I know I'm not the one who should say whether that is the case or not. That, can you hear those bloody guinea pigs? My goodness. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so that's grand. So that's dopamine. Now, endorphin, the painkiller. So the painkiller. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of endorphins that way. So exercising releases endorphins, and I just think endorphins is kind of good energy. So exercising, so that's a bit of crossover. Then dopamine and endorphin, I think. Endorphins, I would go, well, they're both connected to exercise for me. Listening to music can release endorphins. That's a nice one. I didn't know that. So again, a bit of a feel-good thing, listening to music. I'm trying to think. I put on some lovely choral music the other day. The composer was Victoria, and I think they were just masses, but it's a CD I've had for a long time, and it's kind of a bit of a go-to, and particularly at this time of year, I like to just kind of chill out and have that in the background. So that was nice. Watch a movie. I do a lot of that. That's endorphins then as well. But then, if the movie's no good, that's not so good then, is it? Because then I get annoyed or irritated and I'm left feeling like that was a waste of time. So that can backfire. Laughter. Well, yeah. I think did you ever know that when you laugh, it feels nice? And, have a good laugh. It's a great release. It's a great circuit breaker. So laughter, how lovely. Okay, so that's endorphins. Serotonin. Now, serotonin, the mood stabilizer. So this one is a very kind of strongly aligned with wellness in probably the most obvious way we think of wellness, and being a bit sort of zen and being in contact with things that are good and organic and natural. So on this list, there's 4 things here. Sun exposure, and that doesn't mean being exposed to the fruit of your loins. That's male. That's the sun in the sky. Okay? Although I know for my father, he loves being exposed to his sons. It gives him a great sense of camaraderie, comradeship. I passed through the family home last week, and as it happened, my younger brother was there. My 2 younger brothers were there, and my nephew, who is my older brother's son. And then I stuck my head in the door, and for a moment my father was like, "What? All my boys are here, my 4 boys." And we had to point out that no, that's your grandson, the son of the other son who's not there. So that was sun exposure. But of course they're talking about the sun in the sky, that yellow thing up there behind the clouds that we don't see an awful lot in Ireland. That's the hilarious joke. "Oh, what's that? What's that up there? Huh? Oh, it's the sun, is it?" We get plenty of sun, okay? We get so much sun that the leader of the Green Party here in Ireland is saying we should be switching to solar power by 2025. He was on the radio there the other day after his kind of annual party conference and saying, "Yeah, that's where we should be in 2025. Solar power, solar panels everywhere. Kind of big solar panels in the fields, and they can be high off the ground so farmers can still use the land underneath." Sounds nice, but I find it hard to take that guy seriously. Sorry, Aim and Ryan. I don't know what it is. It's there's something about him. I can't quite buy it. I don't know. Anyway, it's what my gut tells me. It just doesn't feel very grounded where he's coming from. So sun exposure, getting the old vitamin D, or the vitamin D if you prefer that pronunciation. Mindfulness stimulates serotonin as well. Being with nature, and meditation. So as I said, these ones are very conventionally in that kind of wellness pocket as we think of wellness nowadays. Like I would argue the previous things I mentioned, exercising, music, movies, eating food, achieving goals, completing tasks, also sort of, in the wellness category. The 4th one is oxytocin, the love hormone. So socializing can give you a bit of oxytocin, hanging out with your pals, being with others, getting that social stimulation. So we're probably all a bit deprived of oxytocin in over the last couple of years with COVID and restrictions, lockdowns, pandemic, all the rest. Physical touch, very important. Are you tactile? Do you like touching? Do you like to be touched? I'm not getting into anything pervy or weird there, but that's it. I'm actually very interested in that because I think culturally that's there's a huge range of what passes for normal or acceptable. This kind of cultural social norms regarding touch. So I'm not sure where the Irish sit. We're probably somewhere, I don't know, I'd say we're somewhere in the middle to the lower end of the scale in terms of comfort with touch. And maybe more Latin or Mediterranean cultures, touch and body comfort is more natural. I found when I was teaching students from different Asian countries, I think people from Thailand were most relaxed physically, and people from Japan were the least relaxed physically. I remember I am tactile. I'm very tactile, and it's part of I think how I communicate affection and warmth and regard, and sort of, to people I like, and also communicate about myself that I'm not taking myself too seriously, and that I'm approachable. And I remember I was teaching in a classroom in Melbourne, and I just instinctively put my hand out and touched the student's arm as I was showing them something in their book, or correcting an exercise, or trying to get their attention in a nice way. And it was a Japanese female student, and she nearly jumped out of her chair and hit the ceiling. She got such a fright. And I was like, oh Lord, this is some terrible, terrible breach of propriety. But anyway, I don't know. So she definitely didn't get an oxytocin hit there. She probably got like adrenaline, or something else. So the other thing that gives you oxytocin is helping others. That's nice. All the Boy Scouts are overflowing with oxytocin. And here is why I thought of this thing. The other thing that gives you oxytocin is petting animals. And there's something about a puppy that is, how can I put this? Irresistible? I know it seems ludicrous. But these bloody animals, that puppy gets released from its sleeping chamber in the morning and just like jumps all over me for 10 minutes and basically wants to consume me, with its tongue, just to lick me into submission. And there's something about this wild, enthusiastic love that the puppy emanates, that you'd want to be a very strange person indeed not to respond in kind. So the puppy's been getting lots of hugs and kisses, and I realise, I was just thinking about it yesterday, and I know my mood has definitely picked up from wherever it was. I mean, just average, and the anticipation of having my wife and daughter back has definitely lifted my spirits. And I was just thinking that, like, gosh, I feel like I've been in quite good form over the last week or so. And then I realised, oh yeah, I've been cuddling that dog for the last 3.5 weeks. Now, I've also been wiping up mountains of dog poo and mopping up puddles of dog piss everywhere. But there is, in the limited time available, I have been doing a little bit of training, trying to train the dog, and she's starting to get some of the training on board. And again, and this is what I always suspected. I always suspected with dog owners and certain types of dog owners that there was a real power trip, and a very prideful power trip of getting your dog under control and showing everyone, this is what my dog can do. And I have to confess, yeah, I get it. It's so satisfying. And, oh my God, the dog stayed when I told it to stay. Unbelievable. And I've been so delighted with these little victories. Anyway, so there you go. Pepper is the new addition to the Clear Out clan, the hashtag blessed menagerie, and I'm really looking forward to introducing her to my wife and daughter tomorrow. I think that's going to be a good moment. So there you go. That was quite the tangent. I didn't realise I was going to bang on about that for as long as I did. But that's kind of maybe that's the hallmark of the podcast. So where to go from there? Now, it's a strange thing. Because I'm going to take a bit of a hard left turn away from cuddly animals and happy hormones to go to a darker subject. There's something about this time of year, the approach to Christmas, and in Ireland, of course, heading, we're on the descent to midwinter. In almost exactly 3 weeks, it'll be the shortest day of the year here, and of course that's why the festival of, that's why there were midwinter festivals, to sort of go, you've made it, you've made it this far, you can like Macbeth, you're halfway over the river, so going on is the same as going back. You may as well keep going and get through it. But there is something about this time of year that I love Christmas. I love the build up to Christmas. I spoke about this a lot last year. I think I dedicated 3, if not 4 episodes of the podcast last December to Christmas thoughts and reflections. I'm not sure if I'll do the same again this year, for fear of repeating myself. I'm percolating a couple of ideas, but I do love it, and I seem to be able to access a certain excitement and very kind of that kind of nice anticipation of there's going to be some good moments over the next few weeks, and looking forward to the big day itself. But at the same time, at this time of year, it's very difficult not to think of other people who are far less fortunate. And I know that sounds completely naff and maudlin or sentimental, but it's it's definitely the counterpoint, and it's always there. And it's obviously part of the sort of complexity and contradiction of Christmas. The way Christmas is stuffed down our throats every year, and the forced sort of jollity of Christmas, and the relentless marketing and branding of Christmas, and the assault of Christmas paraphernalia and music and movies and all the rest, and a lot of that stuff, in a certain size of dose I can handle, and in a certain mode I can handle, but there's something about how aggressively it's thrust in our faces that takes away that opportunity for contemplation, that takes away the opportunity to maybe have space to enjoy Christmas in your own way. And I think that it's hard not to think of the sort of and I mean, I did speak about this last year. It's hard not to think about the commodification of Christmas as something that has really pushed people further and further and further away from maybe the more spiritual aspect of Christmas, the more contemplative aspect of Christmas, the more altruistic aspect of Christmas, perhaps. I'm not going to go into the actual specific religious side of Christmas. I mean, you could, of course, but I choose not to. Don't be offended, please. But I have found myself thinking about Ukrainian people and Russian people. I'm thinking about the families of all these migrant workers who died building stadiums in Qatar. Now I know maybe many of those people may not have come from Christian backgrounds. Maybe Christmas is not a significant holiday. And I mean, that's that's not irrelevant, because I suppose this kind of shadow that lurks behind Christmas or off screen or off stage when people are celebrating Christmas, it's the people who are not having a good Christmas, the people who are enduring loss or having their first Christmas without a loved one, or find themselves in very challenging circumstances. And certainly anecdotally, to pay any attention to the sort of rapidly rising cost of living in Ireland, it's hard not to have a sense that a lot of people are doing it very tough at the moment. And so that sort of counter to kind of like, okay, we're having a good Christmas, but somewhere maybe not very far away, other people are not. And this table of plenty isn't present in other households. And it's certainly not present in certain, in parts of Ukraine. And it's probably not present in certain places in Russia, where there are families whose family members have gone to war. And yeah, I don't know. For some reason, I found myself kind of thinking about this whole kind of wartime idea, the wartime Christmas, and I get images going back to the First World War and the trenches and soldiers from the opposing sides having the briefest sort of ceasefire to break bread together or kick a ball or sing songs. And funnily enough, I found myself the other day listening to Melvyn Bragg's podcast, In Our Time. I don't know if you know this. It's a BBC podcast. Melvyn Bragg is has been like a fixture of British television, a sort of TV journalist, presenter, he presented the South Bank show for years, didn't he? And sort of a very sort of erudite lover of the arts, I suppose, all things kind of literature and theatre and art, etc. Anyway, he has a very nice podcast that my cousin put me onto. Hi Fionn, if you're listening, how are you? And this podcast, In Our Time, usually focuses on an artistic figure or a literary figure or a historic figure, and he invites 3 academics to come and sit with him in the studio and discuss the subject's work and life. And just recently, maybe as recent as last weekend, they did an episode on the poet Wilfred Owen. So Wilfred Owen was an Englishman who fought in the First World War, and he came to prominence really after his death. He died young. He died during the war, just before the war ended. He was an officer, and after the war, his poems began to gather considerable renown and were celebrated by other poets. And on this podcast, they read out some of his poems, they discussed his life, and one of the things they read out that really struck me for its poignancy was his final letter to his mother. And I just found it very, very moving, because he wrote this letter and was probably dead by the time his mother received it. And it's poignant because the letter was so upbeat, and he seemed so certain of his survival. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to read you this letter so you can see what you think of it yourself. And I just did a search online for this letter and some of his poems. And this letter is published on somebody's blog, which is called Advancing Poetry. advancingpoetry.blogspot.com. And there's an addendum to this letter on this blog, which I'll share as well, because that took me down an interesting track as well. In any case, let me read you the letter, and I have another thought on this kind of idea of sending a missive or a letter. So this is Wilfred Owen, the English poet, his last letter to his mother. Might have been his last letter altogether. On the 31st of October 1918, Wilfred Owen was safe behind the lines and writing home to his mother about the place in which he and his men were staying. So, listen to this. Dearest mother, I will call the place from which I'm now writing the smoky cellar of the forester's house. I write on the first sheet of the writing pad which came in the parcel yesterday. Luckily, the parcel was small, as it reached me just before we moved off to the line. Thus, only the paraffin was unwelcome in my pack. My servant and I ate the chocolate in the cold middle of last night, crouched under a draughty tamboo roofed with planks. I husband the malted milk for tonight and tomorrow night. The handkerchief and socks are most opportune, as the ground is marshy and I have a slight cold. So thick is the smoke in this cellar that I can hardly see by a candle 12 inches away, and so thick are the inmates that I can hardly write for pokes, nudges and jolts. On my left, the company commander snores on a bench. Other officers repose on wire beds behind me. At my right hand, Kellett, a delightful servant of A Company in the old days, radiates joy and contentment from pink cheeks and baby eyes. He laughs with a signaller, to whose left ear is glued the receiver, but whose eyes, rolling with gaiety, show that he is listening with his right ear to a merry corporal, who appears at this distance away, some 3 feet, nothing but a gleam of white teeth and a wheeze of jokes. Splashing my hand, an old soldier with a walrus moustache peels and drops potatoes in the pot. By him, Keys, my cook, chops wood. Another feeds the smoke with the damp wood. It is a great life. I am more oblivious than, alas, yourself, dear mother, of the ghastly glimmering of the guns outside and the hollow crashing of the shells. There is no danger down here, or if any, it will be well over before you read these lines. I hope you are as warm as I am, as serene in your room as I am here, and that you think of me never in bed as resignedly as I think of you always in bed. Of this I am certain: you could not be visited by a band of friends half so fine as surround me here. Ever, Wilfred. And he attaches a kiss to the end of that. He was killed 5 days later. 4 days later, on the 4th of November. And he was killed with Second Lieutenant James Kirk, who was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, and 22 others. I'm not sure what that means. I'm reading this directly from this blog. And the creator of the blog, she adds this, which is the citation for James Kirk, which she took from an extract from the London Gazette, dated 3rd of January 1919. Listen to this. So this is for James Kirk, the second lieutenant, getting the Victoria Cross. For most conspicuous bravery and devotion to duty north of Oars on 4th of November 1918, whilst attempting to bridge the Oise Canal. To cover the bridging of the canal, he took a Lewis gun and under intense machine gun fire paddled across the canal on a raft and at a range of 10 yards expended all his ammunition. Further ammunition was paddled across to him, and he continuously maintained a covering fire for the bridging party from a most exposed position till killed at his gun. The supreme contempt of danger and magnificent self-sacrifice displayed by this gallant officer prevented many casualties and enabled 2 platoons to cross the bridge before it was destroyed. Yeah, that's a pretty vivid account of daring do, which ended with the ultimate sacrifice. It doesn't make clear there how Wilfred Owen died, and I didn't bother to do the research to find out. I think he was only 25 when he died. But from what I read there in that letter, and from what I heard on Melvin Bragg's podcast, it seemed he was never happier than in the company of soldiers, of other men, of fellow officers, and he thrived on that camaraderie. Yeah, I don't know if he was he gay? I found myself wondering that as I was listening to them talk about him and how he wrote about men. But I mean, it's 100 years ago, and maybe there was a way of talking about one's male friends that was less self-conscious. I'm not sure. That's an interesting topic in its own right. But I just saw that the letter was, as I said before, particularly poignant. And interesting also then to hear that citation for the second lieutenant. And I suppose the way it glorified his deeds to a certain extent, which is, it's ironic to mention that in the context of a discussion about Wilfred Owen, because he was extremely critical of this idea of glorifying the deeds of war, and he was certainly very critical of the idea of propagandizing the idea of kind of the noble sacrifice. And of course one of his most famous war poems, which I believe is immortalised at one of the war monuments in London perhaps, is, what's the title? Dulce et decorum est. Isn't that it? Dulce et decorum est. Dulce, sweetness, and decorum. Oh yes, it is sweet and fitting. It's the full Latin phrase that it's taken from is translated it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. And in his poem Dulce et decorum est, Wilfred Owen makes it very clear that nothing could be further from the truth, because he depicts the horrors of seeing young men, his fellow soldiers, die on the front, and the gruesome, brutal, bloody, horrifying deaths that they suffered are what he focuses on. So again, do you know what? I might see if I can just bring up the passage from Dulce et decorum est, because it is a powerful poem. And let me see, Dulce et, there you go, poem. Dulce et decorum est. Let's see. This is compelling listening. Let's see if I can. Yeah. Now. Yes. I'm not gonna read the whole thing. I'll just read you maybe a bit of an extract. Someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear, at every jolt, the blood come gargling from the froth corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. It's you know, it feels like it's written by a young man. There's a palpable anger. There's a palpable indignation. There's a palpable righteousness, which I kind of like. He's not loved by everybody, Wilfred Owen. He's not loved by everyone. Again, if you listen to that podcast, you'll learn that W.B. Yeats wasn't a fan, to put it mildly. In fact, he was scathing about Wilfred Owen's talents as a poet, or his lack of talents as Yeats saw it. But yeah, it's I don't know. To me, it feels a little bit appropriate to be listening, to read, to be thinking about that at the moment. And you think about these poor people who've been at war for it's what's 280 days since the Russians went into Ukraine. And if I think it's getting cold here, you can be sure it's much worse. It's much worse in that part of Europe. And at the end of the day, it's like, I think there's a grim truth about war that all combatants, all surviving combatants have testified to after conflict. The sort of utter futility and inhumanity of war that edifies no one. And I think there is, I think, for, I know it's a little bit abstract and it's a little bit, maybe intellectual or philosophical, but there is a tragedy in that. There's a true human cost in that. And I don't know, there's part of me that just feels, life's challenging enough, life's tough enough without picking up guns and going over the border of another country to take lives and to raze towns and villages and to loot and pillage and to commit violent atrocities, and then as the defenders of that land to be sucked into the same the same inhumanity, and maybe inhumanity is a misnomer. Again, we flatter ourselves to think humans, we're the ultimate standard, when all we've done for the entirety of our existence is murder each other, and destroy each other and take. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's tough. It's tough to reflect on that stuff. But I think do spare a thought. do spare a thought for people who are out there doing that, and kind of contextualize by comparison your own struggles and your own suffering, because it might give you pause for thought, and it might give you the opportunity to be grateful that you're not in that kind of a conflict, to be grateful that your house still stands, to be grateful that your neighbours are still alive, to be grateful that the sons of your community are still at home, are still above ground. Anyway, that's that. I don't know. I'm not trying to bring you down. The other context I was going to add to that, to the Wilfred Owen letter, I was thinking about how I'd asked my daughter to send a postcard from Australia to some people we know who had given her some money, a contribution to her Australian holiday. And I was talking to her a couple of days ago, and she was like, "Oh no, there's no there's no postcards in Lismore where she is." And yeah, this has come up before, because I was asking a couple of friends of mine, some listeners of the to the podcast, I was asking them to send a postcard here to my daughter, and they hit me with the same idea. Now, in fairness, one of them came through. You know who you are, Sohail. Thank you so much. But the other two were like, "No, there's no postcards around, or I haven't got around to it." Don't worry, lads. It was only several months ago. There's plenty of time. What I was thinking of something there that took me a long time to get round to. I can't remember what it was. But I think that the timeline was, I can't remember. Anyway, but yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because there was a time when that was the obligatory thing to do. Like, once you were overseas, was you'd send your postcards home. I feel like I did it many times. I mean, I was doing it in 2003 and 2004. I had the opportunity to tour internationally with a play. Phelim, if you're listening, you were there too, buddy. We had a lot of fun. And Karina, you were involved very directly in the second time round. But I took great delight in sending postcards from different parts of the world back to my wife, my young wife, back then. And that would still be my impulse, my instinct if I was overseas, is to go pick up a postcard or two and dispatch them. And comparing that idea, like sending a postcard, and then thinking of Wilfred Owen's very nicely written letter in the sort of the language style of the time. "I husband the malted milk." That's a great little line, isn't it? But this is the nature of things now. Like, ask yourself, to whom would you like to give an account of your current status? To whom would you communicate via letter? To whom would you give a sketch of where you're at the moment? I'm not sure how many of us think that way anymore, because we're so easily able to communicate and reach out and give up to the minute updates via social media and texts. But it's, I don't know, isn't style the great cost? Isn't personal expression the great cost of this? Because there was a real art to letter writing and communicating well in written form. And to communicate well, I mean, maybe a postcard, if not a telegram, was the sort of the ancestor of a tweet. You know, if a tweet is limited to a certain number of characters, and you've only got so much space in which to say something, that was the challenge with the postcard as well. To be, you know, maybe you know, if that was your choice, to be pithy and witty, and gay in your postcards. Having a lovely time. Wish you were here. So no postcard from my daughter. But one thing that did strike me in texts, my daughter has a voice in texts that I was like, oh, who is this person? Who is this person that seems quite self-possessed and communicates with a certain amount of poise and humour? It's my 9-year-old daughter. I was like, wow, that was quite striking. So she's had access to my wife's phone over this 5-week period in Australia. And surely that can only lead to an inevitable clamouring for her own phone, but she can wait. Santa ain't bringing no phones this year. Yeah. There are, you know, those milestones will come. Yeah, interesting. The tangent that I kind of went on after reading that Wilfred Owen piece on that blog, where I saw that the second lieutenant who got the citation, I saw his name was James Kirk, and I guess because I'm of a certain age and have a certain pop cultural frame of reference, I immediately thought of Star Trek and James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise. And so I just impulsively tapped into my good friend Google. Did Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, did he name Captain Kirk after a British officer? And what I found out was, because I was trying to see, you know, would it come up and go, yeah, he named him after this officer who died alongside Wilfred Owen in the First World War. But no, in fact, and if you're a Star Trek fan, maybe you already know this, and if you're an Australian, you might find this interesting, or if you're a student of British naval history, you might find this interesting. Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, as so affectionately essayed by William Shatner, was named after James Cook, the captain of the HMS Endeavour, which was like a science research ship that went south to New Zealand and Australia. It was one of the first British expeditions that led to the so-called discovery of Australia. The white discovery of Australia is the more apt way to think of it. So yeah, there you go. And he had, apparently he had an inscription. James Cook had an inscription in his captain's log that inspired Gene Roddenberry. So I'm trying to find that quote because I saw it earlier. It was kind of amusing. Oh yeah, there it is. Ambition leads me farther than any other man has been before me. So this was Captain Cook's journal entry. Ambition leads me farther than any other man has been before me. A little bit self-aggrandizing there. Or maybe just genuine, a genuine sense of the vastness of his achievement. But Roddenberry altered that phrase and it became the Star Trek catchphrase that used to be part of the intro for every Star Trek episode. to boldly go where no man has gone before. So there you go. Captain James Cook, who I suppose is the face of European colonisation or British colonisation of Australia. Very controversial figure to many, because he would have been the face of indigenous genocide, if that's not too strong a term. Captain Cook's cottage was transported from England to Melbourne and sits proudly as a popular tourist attraction in Fitzroy Gardens in Melbourne. I never went. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. I was in Melbourne for 10 years. I never went to Captain Cook's cottage. I'm sorry. What's interesting about that is, and I'm gonna add a link to this article in the description of the episode so you can check it out. There's a very good journalist who writes for The Guardian Australia. His name is Paul Daly, and he's very good on Australian history and very good on he's very good on indigenous issues. I was going to say indigenous issues. Indigenous issues. I've read some of his articles before. I really kind of like his very frank take on Australian history and the white perception of Australian history. And he has a great piece that he put in The Guardian a couple of years ago called Captain Cook's Cottage, the place he didn't ever call home. And he's basically saying there's no evidence to suggest Captain Cook ever actually lived in that cottage. It was where his parents lived, and he may or may not have visited them in their old age there before it was transported from, I think, Yorkshire to Melbourne for like a centenary celebration after the founding of Melbourne. So have a read of that article because it's pretty interesting. The HMS Endeavour. So look, I know that's a bit of a mixed bag of an episode. I'm aware, and the through line is not that evident, and maybe that's a reflection of a certain amount of fatigue on my part. Trying to get this done before my girls get back, but Pepper was mentioned, the new dog. Captain Kirk was mentioned. Captain Cook was mentioned. I don't know what rank Wilfred Owen was, but he was mentioned, of course, as well. And yeah, bit of a mix. I was driving home tonight. I was driving home tonight, and I saw a couple of teenagers in school uniform, a boy and a girl, kissing each other passionately on the path, and I was like, oh, because there was something. They were quite a handsome looking couple, and there was. Yeah, I don't know. It was actually kind of lovely. It wasn't like a real gross, messy, over the top adolescent snog. There was something very intense, but also something very kind of classical about it. And I was like, oh wow. And I immediately just had a flash and went, oh man, that's what's coming. That's what's coming, with my daughter in a few years' time. But yeah, it was kind of lovely. There was something, I don't know if I had a little pang of nostalgia, or I don't know what, but it was, I was just looking, as I drove past, they were so intently there kissing, and there was a real stillness in it. And he was taller than her, and I just thought, yeah, the whole world has ceased to exist for them in this moment. They are just locked on to each other with such intent. And they were still, but that's how they were moving. So maybe that's the through line through all of this today or tonight. I'm recording at night. And further up the road, I passed another young fella who I've seen before and who I've mentioned before on this podcast. This little guy who I've seen a few times now, and there he was walking up the path on the other side of the road, and that head down and the hand with the phone up to his face, just looking at his phone as he walked along, fully in the grips of that addiction. I was like, oh man, put down the phone, get your head up, look around you. Look what you're missing. Look back down the road. That could be you. Look at those two. Look at that guy kissing that girl kissing that guy. Anyway, let's leave it there. The oxytocin was flowing, the love hormone. Okay. That's it. As I say, a mixed bag. I almost feel like I want to apologise for that. Puppy dogs to tragic World War I poets. But listen, that's life. It's all in there. We're experiencing all these things. All things are coexisting. Nothing is discrete and on its own and isolated and removed. It's all interblended, melded, welded. Everything. It's all part of the flow, the flux. And you're in it, and I'm in it, we're in it, the guinea pigs are in it, these cats beside me are in it, that puppy dog, still sound asleep on the other side of the room, is in it too. That's kind of beautiful and it's kind of heartbreaking. So there you go. And maybe that's how I get to feeling at this time of year. I am so grateful for what I have and feel quite aware of the terrible losses and absences that other people have to suffer. Okay, let's leave it there. As always, you can throw me some love, some feedback, some commentary via the social media links, which you will find wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you are so moved and want to throw some financial heft behind this creative, independent effort, that would be very welcome. I would love that. But I'd be equally as happy with just a shout out, a share, a recommend, a subscribe, whatever you can do to help me grow this thing. Let this acorn grow into a proud oak tree, perhaps. All right. You mind yourselves. Go easy. Travel safely. Move well. Move with intent. Hold yourself carefully. And I will talk to you again next week. Okay, take care. Mind yourselves. Bye.